Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for another industry session. My name is Manny, and Frank. It's like I almost did this for a second time. Frank, are my co-host, who's also going to be taking these over, hopefully within the next session. So once again, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for joining us. We are really happy to have one of our very own, Chris Nichols, who is a character artist at Digital Domain, which is pretty impressive because I was talking to Chris earlier, and I was like, typically when someone thinks of, the title character artist, it's usually reserved for games. So I think that's pretty interesting, and so he'll go over that in more detail. So just a couple of things to note. Number one, if you guys have any questions at all, please make sure you drop those in the Q&A. That's in the bottom center of your dashboard. It's a little icon with a Q, and below that it says Q&A. Click on that and post any questions you might have. That just allows us to filter them and address any of your questions that you might have for Chris. These sessions are for you guys, so the more questions, the better. Chris is going to be showing us some pretty kick-ass, amazing stuff, so definitely, ask away. Once again, it's like I know a lot of you guys are here pretty early, joining us, and we thank you for that. But to really, get the most out of it, make sure you ask the questions. This session, as usually, is sponsored by CG Master Academy, the leader in online digital art school. Training geared towards the art, films, visual effects, and game industry. There is 2 weeks left to register, even though the banner here says 3 weeks. Got to have Ted change that. But 2 weeks left to register, and I think that's about it. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to let Chris introduce himself. So Chris, take it away.
Thanks very much, Manny. So first of all, thanks everybody for joining me tonight. Now, this is the first time I've done something like this, so I just want to ask for your patience a little bit because I'm going to be juggling, a lot of different pieces of software and jumping between videos, images, stuff like that. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Chris Nichols. I've been working on character art in the visual effects industry primarily for about 15 years. Over my career, I've worked for Digital Domain, Spin Visual Effects, Method, and Double Negative, to name a few.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Can you share your screen?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Hang on a sec. Where is it? Oh, I thought I was sharing my screen. Hang on a sec.
I think it's because I had my screen share on, somehow it limits you.
Okay, sure. Sorry about that. How's that?
Yep, there you go. Beautiful.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. So where was I? All right, so basically, I've been a concept artist. Oops, hang on a sec. I just got to move this bar over here. Okay, cool. So I've worked at Spin Visual Effects, Method, Double Negative, and I've been at Digital Domain for almost 10 years now. I've worked as a modeler, a texture painter, a look dev artist, and recently a concept artist, which is combining all those things. But I'm very passionate in particular about surfacing creatures and characters. So what surfacing means is the method of creating a CG creation surface as realistic as possible through the displacement detailing, making a variety of texture maps like a color map, bump, specular, roughness, etc. And then finally, how the displacement and the textures are described in a surface shader in a CG lighting environment, meaning how diffuse or reflective it is, how the displacement is affecting the shading, creating shadows and highlights, and how it reads from any distance, from close up or far away. So I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of great creature shows over my career, such as Ender's Game, Jack the Giant Slayer, X-Men, Days of Future Past, Thor, the first Thor film, Power Rangers, and most recently Avengers, Endgame, and Infinity War. So over the years, I've developed my techniques for surfacing over various projects at work, but also at home. I always try to do a lot of personal projects when I can. And in my course for CGMA, I'm showing a lot of these methods and techniques, how I approach surfacing a character for film or cinematics. But I will talk a little bit more about that later. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the backstory of making Thanos. So back at the end of 2016, I was very fortunate to be asked to join a relatively small team of people to work on a test to develop Thanos before we'd even really officially landed Infinity War. So I was tasked on the project with creating the fine detail sculpting. That's the pores, the wrinkles, but also some of the broader forms in the face. Besides that, I was also creating all the texture maps and doing the initial look dev for the skin surface. So I just want to quickly show you the test that we made for, hang on a second here. Oh, come on, exit. I just want to show you quickly the test that we made for Marvel. So I'm going to just go over to one of these videos, and this is all the stuff I'm going to share about Thanos. This is all stuff that's been released online because I can't officially show you any of the behind the scenes stuff that hasn't already been approved by Marvel. So that's just a legality. So I just want to give you a heads up that most of what I'm showing you is stuff from that's been released by the studios on YouTube and in image format as well. So this was the test that we made for Thanos, and this is before we even got Infinity War. So as you can see, the look of Thanos is slightly different from what showed up in the final film. It was about a 3 or 4 month period that we were developing Thanos, but this test was probably around maybe 2 months of work. But what this allowed me to do is to really figure out my process, how I was going to approach Thanos, because everybody on the show, believe me, wanted to really bring it for this character. We wanted this to be one of the best creatures ever created in CG. And so there was a lot of pressure on everybody to really try to explore new techniques. And I was no exception. I really wanted to do something I'd never done before. I wanted to advance my techniques for creating a creature. And I was very fortunate to have the necessary time to do a lot of exploration until we got a look that we thought was really good and the studios really liked as well. Just 1 second. So I'm going to go back to the very start. Before we started working on the character, we had a bit of concept art from Marvel. So I'm just going to pull some of that up now. Just 1 second. Oh, where is it? Sorry, I thought I had this saved out. Okay. So the head of concept over at Marvel is Ryan Meandering. And so before we'd even started on the show, they'd already spent a lot of time developing Thanos in a way that at least captures the essence of the character, the shape, the coloration of him, the expression. A lot of this information is already included in this concept art. You know, it looks fairly similar to how Thanos ended up in the final film. Now, as a studio, when we get a creature like this, we usually know who the actor is going to be that's going to play this creature. And in this case, it was Josh Brolin. So as a team of facial modelers, that being Ron Miller, Chris Bosjanik, Darren Handler, these are some of the top guys that were at Digital Domain at the time, and some of them still are. We kind of got together and we were disseminating what we could do to bring a lot of Josh into Thanos. And so one of the big things is looking at the shape of the eyes and how that translates to Thanos, because Ryan's concept didn't necessarily capture a lot of that detail in there. And so, the shape guys working on the face are sort of remolding that concept sculpt to try to get it to look as close to Josh as possible. Now, for my part, as a texture painter, I'm trying to address all the detail that I can see in Josh's face and think about how I can translate as much of this detail across to Thanos as possible. But obviously, Thanos has different proportions to Josh. And so not necessarily everything is going to line up. Now, if we look at a basic scan of Josh, this is not a high fidelity scan, but this is the sort of scan that we get when we're working with facial data. So it gives me a lot of good ideas about what the surface of the skin is going to look like reacting to light in that very broad sense of the sculpt, meaning the shapes that I'm seeing in the forehead. There's like a flat plane in the center, the way that his brow is furrowed just in a neutral sort of facial pose. This is all really good sort of reference material that I wanted to bring over to Thanos. So I started blocking out a lot of the medium and high frequency detail. So this is more of a medium sculpt. This is when I took the mesh that the facial modelers had sort of, they'd already made a start on the sculpt. So Chris Bosjanik had already started to sculpt out a lot of the detail on the chin and make some established sort of shapes that translated all the way to the end of the project. But I sort of took it over because I was going to be doing all the fine detail. And then I made a few more adjustments too, like putting the key lines in for the forehead detail, making sure that all these crow's feet that Josh has on his face are also lining up with Thanos. So you could sort of see this sort of before and after. Again, this sculpt is not very high resolution, but it gave me a lot of good reference material for where to put the sculpt. You have to excuse me, I got a bit of a dry throat tonight, I'm afraid. So the next step, I'm just going to show you the final result here. Let's see if I can play this.
No matter how many times I've seen this character, it's like I'm still blown away.
Oh, thanks, man. We put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, Joe's.
Oh.
So you guys, and I'm just curious. It's like, so did you guys model Thanos?
Yeah. Well, we got a concept sculpt from Ryan. And but that just doesn't quite have the necessary detail in it.
Oh.
So, like, oops, let's close that. So the concept sculpt is, it has a lot of great surface detail in it, but it's just not going to be going to hold up to the film.
Yeah.
So we took it as reference material, tried to match the proportions, but essentially a lot of that detail is going to have to be high fidelity and hold up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the coloration of Thanos, because he has you can see in the render he has a bit of a interesting look to him. He's not straight purple. There's a lot of different tonal variety going on, especially in the areas where there's like a hard surface directly underneath it, like the bridge of the nose, the eyebrows, but then around the eye area is a little bit lighter. So when I was painting the texture maps, what I was doing is I'm again referencing Josh. I'm looking at him really close up to try to see exactly how the coloration of his skin could translate over to Thanos. Now, Josh he's a mature guy. He's obviously somebody who's been in the California sun quite a bit. So his skin is, it looks great for his age, sure. It's a handsome man. But there's a bit of sun damage that just happens naturally. And I wanted to get that into Thanos because it really helps tell the story about the character. I wanted to make it feel like he's, a mature guy that's been around a long time. He's been outside using his bare hands to crack skulls, wield a giant sword. And so, I wanted to get those kind of details over to Thanos. So even like in the cavity detail in here of the crow's feet, that area is generally a little bit lighter. And so I wanted, mostly because like when somebody squints and they're in the sun, it's obviously not getting any UV light on there. And so it tends to be a little bit lighter pigment. And then outside of that area that's exposed to the sun is usually a little bit redder because of the sun damage. So usually everything in textures is slightly exaggerated. And that just sort of helps bring the creature to life and feel a little bit more dynamic. So when I'm projecting my textures onto the face, what I like to do is I always start with a polarized image. And this is a good example of that. And for those that don't know what that term means, it's a photo that doesn't have any reflection in it. So you're really just dealing with diffuse information. So what I tend to do with Thanos and all my creatures in my workflow is find some really nice polarized photos like this. These are usually very high resolution. And I start by projecting these on to the surface so that I've got a really nice, interesting, human-looking base that I can start to work with. Usually there's a set of these from all different angles as well. So you can get a very clean, very even surface that I'm able to take out a lot of the inconsistencies of the face, like the pores. You don't want any of that pore detail in there, like little hairs around the mouth, even spider veins. But if you leave some of it in, just maybe 20%, it just creates a really nice base so that when I start to create some color variation in the face, then it just translates really nicely and gives it's almost a very subtle, nuanced look. But that's the technique that I always like to do, is starting with that polarized set of photos projected, and then I can start to work on the variations in tone and color from there. But it's inheriting that human feeling that you may not notice on a conscious level, but it comes through in the textures. So the website that I usually get all my textures from, and I use them exclusively for the texturing in the CGMA course, is from a website called Texturing XYZ. And they not only offer awesome set of color face photos sets, but they also have a really great variety of skin scans for the surface of the face. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process of creating this fine detail of skin, because for me, this was one of the biggest breakthroughs and biggest challenges as well when I started out, is how can I get that really high fidelity skin pore detail without using a scan. So I really wanted it to be hand painted, hand sculpted kind of exercise in order to get the detail I wanted. But the other thing that I need to stress is that when you're working in this environment, you're getting a lot of notes from supervisors, from clients, and you need to be able to adjust your sculpt very quickly for the next iteration. You don't have weeks to do it, or even several days. You really want to have something that's very flexible. And so I'm using a Mari projection-based texturing workflow to get a lot of this high fidelity detail onto the face. So it's not just the face that I'm using the scans for. I'm using it for the hands as well. So let's see if I just press play here. If you like take a look at some of this hand detail, especially in this shot in particular, you can see like just how much detail is coming from these scans. It holds up so beautifully to camera, and you can get as far away or as close to it without it really breaking. This has always been a big problem with texturing, is that sometimes you get the camera too close, it starts to look pixely or noisy, but I always try to work very cleanly so that anything that I'm projecting, painting, is going to read from close up, but also from a distance. And again, another thing I want to stress is telling the story. Now, if we go back a couple of frames here, you can see underneath his hands, he's got all this great sort of dried up skin, callus detail, and makes his hands look very tough. They're very dry. It's because I wanted to get that sense of story behind it. So again, he's out on the battlefield. He's wielding a giant sword, and so he's getting his hands dirty, and they should reflect that in the fingertips and in the under the hands. Again, it's maybe not something you notice when you're watching the film because you're getting pulled into the story, but people, I've been very happy to hear that people found Thanos to be a very realistic character. And it's really encouraging to hear that, because we put so much work into the detail in every little aspect, whether it's the eyeballs or the hands, the fingernails. The directors really were brave in putting the cameras close to Thanos as they wanted, and it didn't feel as if they were having to work around the model or the look dev at all. So this is an eye test. This is also part of the test that we sent to Marvel before we got awarded the show, and they showed this to Josh Brolin, and he was really impressed by it, because he was like, wow, I don't have to overact. I can just be myself on set, and my nuances of the face are coming through. It feels like my performance. And even though there's a little bit of interpretation, most of it is coming from Josh. And we're really here just to support his performance through the art that we're doing. So so that's a little bit about the skin surfacing detail. And then obviously the look dev of Thanos. I use V-Ray in my pipeline, and I use it in the course as well. Same kind of skin shader as I use for Thanos. It's the AL surface shader, really great for subsurface scattering. And this was another breakthrough for us too, because it was much more superior than any kind of skin shader we'd used in the past. Because what it does is it really shades the detail in the displacement much better than previous skin shaders, so that the scatter is showing up really nicely. It feels fleshy, but it's not creating any weird glows in any of the crevice areas of the eyes and in any of the wrinkles and pores of the face. So this is another really big breakthrough for us. And I was really fortunate to be able to do the look dev, create the skin shading for Thanos. And this really helped me inform my texturing as well, because I could do some texture work, color, bump, displacement, whatever it was, and then I could put that into the skin shader and get feedback very quickly, and instead of having to send it over to a look dev artist to plug that in and do their thing, I was getting like almost real-time feedback that I could fold back into my texturing. And over the duration of the course, I'm going to be showing you how I go from a concept all the way to a finished render, and how the skin shading is informing a lot of that texture work along the way. So let me see if there's anything else.
I think we got, it's a perfect, oh man, it's a, I don't want to interrupt you, but we just had a question that I think is relevant to what you're doing. So what was the, Tarhel would like to know, what was the resolution, the texture resolution size for Thanos?
You know what? It wasn't as high as you might think. We used 4K for Thanos.
Wow.
We had him split up into about 30 different UDIMs though. So, like the hand, the fingers would get their own UDIM, the forearm, we split him up. but not in a crazy fashion. Like I've seen people go a lot crazy with their UVs, but we wanted it to be efficient, right? Like you don't want the render to really slow down because there's too much data. And I found that I was able to get more than enough detail out of that resolution.
Cool. And then keeping to that, what was the name of the skin shader you mentioned earlier?
It's called the AL Surface Shader. It was originally
AL Surface Shader.
Yeah, it was originally developed for Arnold, and then it was brought into V-Ray a few years ago, and I've been using it ever since. I know a lot of Arnold users are using the Random Walk skin shader, which is also fantastic, if not better shader than the AL Surface. But for me, I'm just so familiar with this material that I use it in my workflow all the time. It's so versatile and flexible and gives me really predictable results. Another thing that with Thanos is that he doesn't have as many textures as you might think. I tried to get everything as simple as possible because I'm not a massively experienced look dev artist, but I can usually get what I want just by using a color, a speck, a bump, and a lot of that other detail that is on Thanos, like sweat, stuff like that. Other look dev artists were sort of hooking that up, and I was providing a lot of different masks to describe dirt, sweat, that kind of thing. But it was at its core, it was a very sort of simple setup. But because the textures were so high fidelity, I didn't have to go to great lengths to really get a complex look dev setup because the skin shader was great, the textures were very developed. And V-Ray is a really great renderer as well. Like I love using it. It's really fast, gives me great sort of results. And so I always approach it as an artist first and then a technician second, because I like things to be simple. I like things to be easy to digest. And I want it to be fun as well. I don't want to get bogged down in looking at a massive shading network and trying to figure out why I hooked that in and what that's doing. It's just way too cumbersome. I try to keep it as simple as possible. And to be honest, Thanos has to look great in lots of different lighting conditions. It's not just, one lighting. He's showing up in, like outside in Vormir. He's showing up in that sort of the red, one of the Infinity Stones. And so his skin has to look great in every lighting environment. And that was another really tricky thing, was trying to get that purple to look consistent between all the different lighting setups, whether it's a red light or blue light. You run the risk of him looking too dark or too light. Obviously, comp can do a lot of that, but I tried to keep the tones of the purples kind of neutral so that they didn't really react too strongly to any one kind of lighting. So the next thing, I'm gonna start to wrap up Thanos a bit because I've talked a little bit about that, and obviously after the test, I put a lot more work into Thanos, especially with the arms and the hands, just making sure everything was really holding up to camera. And over the duration of the film of Endgame, I kept adding to the detail because we'd get different lighting environments and different sort of setups and scenes that something was not looking quite right. But it's funny because I really believe that saying that art is abandoned, it's not really ever completed, because even on to the next film, which was Endgame, I was still going back in and adding detail to the head. So I'm just going to pull up some images here. Just 1 second. So this is Thanos in Endgame. It looks relatively the same, but I went back into the forehead, and there was a lot of stuff in the film that bothered me. I just didn't feel like some of the detail was reading as well as it should. Some areas looked a little bit shinier than they should. So I went back in and re-detailed some of the face, and also the maps at Texturing XYZ. Over the course of making Thanos, the latest maps had actually gotten better and even higher fidelity. So I wanted to take advantage of that. So I did go back in and just sort of adjust some of the pore detail just to enhance it a little bit. Now, the big thing with Endgame is that Thanos is damaged on one side of his face because he uses the double snap, meaning that a surge of power is gone through all over the left side of Thanos's face, and it's damaged it. It feels really burnt and crispy. Now, when we started working on Endgame, the studio wasn't quite sure what that should look like. So I spent a couple of weeks just trying to figure that out in 2D. Again, going back to that concept stage, I always find that's really important because it's a very quick way of trying a lot of different things out. And so I was doing lots of variations of Thanos with the damaged face. And it went as extreme as almost looking like Two-Face, where you could see the sinew and the bone underneath the skin. But obviously the studio wasn't really quite down with that. And so it became more of like a sort of dry, sort of scabby sort of surface. And another thing that you have to think about when you're doing this sort of work is how is it going to affect the other departments? Because in my concept, I had some where the eye was kind of drooping, like some of the muscles in the face had been damaged. And so part of the face was kind of starting to sag a little bit. But, you know, that really affects the rigging department, the facial team. A lot of animators, like a lot of departments are affected by that. But having those 2D concepts to kind of show and get some feedback and approvals from really helps to accelerate the process too. It's nothing worse than being stuck in some kind of design hell where you're trying to texture and look dev and then show it and, you know, it's not really hitting the mark. I always recommend developing a set of 2D skills so that you can very quickly go back into Photoshop and do paint overs just to sort of get a vague idea of how the textures should look. So when that got approved, I could move into the textures, and it was relatively quick to try to get it to a point where we could render it and see how it was looking in the scenes.
Hey, Chris, I got a question for you because you referenced Photoshop. And, you know, it's kind of funny with so many developments. What is the single biggest thing in the last 10 years that has changed texturing, or has it changed at all, in your opinion, in terms of the workflow? You know, there's been a lot of modeling changes in terms of advancements there with digital sculpting, but on the texturing side for you, what are the big ones and what are the core things that seem to never change?
That's a really great question, actually, and I haven't really thought about it before, but I would say today is the best time in history to be a texture painter because it's gotten so much easier to do really beautiful looking texture work. Now, when I started back in 2004, or maybe a little bit earlier than that, 2003, 2004, you know, the tools just were very rudimentary. A lot of it was you were painting textures in Photoshop. Using UDIMs or UV tiles was a real nightmare because there was just no real software that you could see all the textures on the mesh until you rendered it. And even setting up that shading network was really hard. But today we have a lot of great software that supports the creative process. Mostly Mari, that is by far the number one piece of texturing software in the industry. Substance as well as being used quite a lot. Substance Designer, Substance Painter, they all have their strengths, but for me, I'm a big Mari fan because they're also developing a lot of that procedural workflow in their layers as well, in their layer system using nodes, so that it's a lot more like the Substance Designer workflow in that way. But it's just a very versatile piece of software. It's been around, well, I guess since I think Weta developed it for Avatar. So that would have been 2009, but it really didn't make it into the public space until the end of 2010. So the first creature that I worked on with Mari was the Frost Beast in Thor. So you can sort of see here, this is the first thing I ever did in Mari, and I was creating the skin detail, like all the bump maps, and also a lot of the color work as well. But you can sort of see if I stop there, like this is all this is the first time I was like, wow, this is amazing. This software is just so cool what I can do in it. And I got very excited because a lot of the projects I had in my head, I always run into a brick wall with the technical side of it. And it would just take me months to do something that should take me weeks. And so I think having faster computers, obviously, more RAM, 64-bit systems, and having this awesome texture software that was really put through the paces on films like Avatar and Planet of the Apes and The Hobbit, you know, that really has empowered an artist to become a texture painter. But also, you know, rendering software has got way better too. V-Ray's really powerful. I can see my renders in maybe 1/10 of the time that it used to take 10 years ago. I would say, like, just to render displacement was a nightmare back in Mental Ray. But, you know, these days, all the renderers are really good. Arnold, V-Ray, RenderMan, Redshift even. They're all very fast, some of them using GPUs so that you can really speed up the process. But number one, it just really empowers the artist to create, to explore, to really bring their imagination to life and just put it on the screen. It's such an artistic process instead of being a technical one. I feel like that technicality stuff really sort of holds you back. But if you're just free to create, I think, you know, you're capable of great things, and it's so much more satisfying, you know. So I think that would be the biggest thing. Software, hardware, that's really improved, obviously. But, you know, having Mari as your chief texturing package, Substance Designer and Painter as a supplement to that. Like, for example, the first time I used Substance Painter was for the Zords in Power Rangers. So these were all painted inside of Substance Painter because we had very fast turnarounds. We had to get this stuff looking consistent between all the different Zords. And so I had to create materials that I could sort of apply to all the different Zords, and they'd look fairly consistent in the way that their paint was scratched, the sort of grime detail and dust that would be applied to them. And then I would, as a team, we would enhance that inside of Mari to kind of add extra detail and just try to take it to that next level so it looked good on camera. In relation to that too, I also use Substance Painter for the for these rock giant guys, the putties. They were, again, had to look consistent. And so I'd use a hybrid of Substance Painter and Mari to get the that rock look. And the team could take my setup that I've made and apply it and put their own personal touches on it. So, you know, the process was sped up, looked consistent, and looked really good, most importantly.
Hey, Chris, we got a question from Chu Jansen. You were talking a little bit about Mari, and his question was, how did you manage memory resources when you're working procedurally while keeping the workflow non-destructive?
Well,
or maybe you didn't. I don't know. That's the thing.
I tend to. I mean, there's several things you can do. So in Mari, let's see if I just have it open here. So one thing you can do is that you can use the caching to cache all the layers that you're not using. So say, for example, I'm creating some dry skin for this bump map and I'm not using ridges or HSV or any of these layers here, then I could just select them and I could apply the caching to it. And so what that means is that it's not going to, I'm not going to be able to edit those layers, but I'm able to free up the memory that those layers would take. Now, when it comes to working procedurally, I don't have my node graph set up for this particular project, but there's definitely a technique where you can start to put I can't remember the term. So it's like a point where all those layers below it, behind the network are getting cached. It's sort of like a point where they're not being sort of used up in the memory. So I'm actually still pretty new to the node graph workflow. I use it a little bit, but I'm still more of a layers guy. I just prefer that. But now that I've moved to more concept art and doing a lot of creature sort of surfacing stuff, I'm not doing as much sort of heavy hard surface environments or that kind of thing where I could really take advantage of that workflow. But yeah, there's definitely ways where you can sort of cache the section that you're not using, so that frees up the memory for the layers that you are using. Is any other questions there?
We got a couple other questions. I guess because these projects are so large with so many people, how many people would you say with a character like Thanos touched them? Like, and maybe you want to localize it just to the texturing, or if you wanted to, if you could even speak to how many people actually worked on Thanos, because it's quite a collective endeavor.
You're absolutely right. I can't even imagine how many people at Digital Domain worked on Thanos. If you're talking about every aspect of the character, from the the rigging, the facial shapes, any sort of adjustments to the look dev where they're adding sweat or dirt or anything that relates to a scene in the film. There's effects guys as well that are adding stuff to him. It's probably, if you look at the credit list, it's probably hundreds of people that are getting their hands on Thanos in some way. As far as the textures go, I was chiefly responsible for all the textures on Thanos. The clothing was done by different people, like the armor that he wears, and even his sort of casual outfit that he was wearing underneath the armor. That was done by different modelers, different texture painters. But I oversaw the process being a texture lead on the show, so I was giving feedback and also relaying information from other supervisors to the team. So my team on Endgame was about 20 texture painters. That was over the entire show. So that's working on environments, props, clothing, characters. Because besides Thanos, there was also Red Skull, Ebony Maw, Corvus Glaive. A lot of those characters were also, a lot of them were shared with other studios. So some came from Framestore, from ILM. But, I was also overseeing Hulk as well, because we created our own version of the Hulk for the scenes where he's fighting with Thanos in Endgame. I think I have it here somewhere, one of these. So, see, I think this is all Thanos stuff. Getting a little bit bogged down with some of these videos, so just have to excuse me here. But yeah, and besides all those massive characters, there's also a lot of digi-doubles too, like any sort of actor that's interacting with Thanos or some of the other characters usually is going to have a digi-double. So it was a massive amount of work. I was primarily focused on Thanos, but most of my day, I would say, after production started, I would maybe spend 1 to 2 hours on my tasks, and the rest of the time in meetings, in dailies, attending to whatever was the hot button issue of the time. But I will say that was the best show I ever worked on. It was the most fun I had. Everybody loved the work they were doing, a lot of passion, a lot of hard work, but it felt smooth. It was really well run. Like working with Marvel is for me anyway, has been always a great experience. They're very great at giving you good feedback. And yeah, I can't really say enough good things. They really gave us a great opportunity here, and they turned out to be quite happy with the result. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
There's a lot of people that touched Thanos. I'm definitely not taking all the credit for that. I'm really just, my sort of contribution was more the concept, the texturing, the sculpting, and the primary look dev as well.
Hey, Chris, we got a question from a fellow instructor, a guy named Ben Ert, and he has a question about blending. The question is when you blend in between, for instance, rust and shiny metal, Do you use mask-driven layered shaders? If so, could the blending between different IORs cause visual issues? It almost sounds like a question that could be kind of almost, I mean, I don't know if you get into that in the class section of the presentation and what you're going to be doing, but you know, figure it's sort of overlapping a little bit.
That's like one of the most complex questions I think I've ever been asked. Now, I need to preface this by saying most of my my look dev and texturing is mostly focused on doing character work. I do, you know, I have done some more hard surface stuff as well, but my experience with shading is fairly basic. Like if I was trying to do rust, you know, I feel like what I would probably do is do blend materials so that I would have a shiny surface, and then I would use a mask to describe another material, say like the rust, and then obviously those two materials have different index of refractions on them. So maybe one's very low and then the other's quite high to mimic the look of metal. And then the rest of it is going to be done in the specular and in the roughness value as well. So that would be my approach. If you talk to a more experienced look dev artist that deals with this stuff all the time, they may have a totally different way of doing it, but I feel like I would probably get the look I want using a blend material setup.
That's awesome. Thank you for just going into a little bit of that. The questions are very wide, tons of interest coming in through right now. There's another topic on related to the issue of surfacing. What's the process for balancing, you know, what goes into bumps and what goes into displacement? And
okay.
how do these decisions impact the shaders?
So my personal preference is to try to keep everything in the displacement as much as I can. With Thanos, what you're looking at here, there isn't any bump maps at all on the surface of the skin, because I want to try to describe the surface detail as much as I can with displacement, because it gives, in my opinion, much better realistic results than using a bump, which is obviously a bit of a fake. If you're actually deforming the surface, then yes, you want to use displacement if you want the highest kind of quality. Now, sometimes that's just not an option, and you can get very good results with bump maps, but I tend to try to do as much as I can in the displacement setup. So for example, for Thanos, what I would do is when I'm projecting my displacement, the XYZ detail, those are grayscale maps. So you could use any one of the 3 channels that comes in with those XYZ maps as a bump map. But what I would do is I would take the red channel, which is the very large, broad sort of shapes, the large sort of undulation of the skin and the pores and the wrinkles. And I would actually put that into the base displacement for Thanos. I would bake that in Mudbox so that I would have my sculpt, which going back here looks like that. And then I would take the red channel and bake it in, and I'd be able to tweak the intensity of that layer so that I could get the right look. So it's working with all the other shapes in the face. And I would bake that out as my 32-bit displacement. Then yeah, let's go back over here for a second. So, oops. Not supposed to do that. If I go back over to the XYZ, so there's 3 different channels that come with the map that you're projecting. So you can see that without isolating them, it just looks like reds and blues and greens in there. But you can isolate each channel, the red, the green, and the blue, and each one has a different layer of detail in it. So with that green and the blue channel, which is the high frequency stuff, that really beautiful looking macro detail, I could layer that back into my look dev setup with a slider in the shading so that I could control how much intensity was coming in, but it was being supported by the Mudbox displacement because everything aligns perfectly. The pores in the Mudbox displacement are aligning with the green and the blue channel from the XYZ. So that is really what gave me the sort of detail that I was able to capture from Thanos in Thanos's skin. And, you know, without that, I don't think I would have got the crispness of detail. I just wouldn't have had that sort of level of a relationship between large and high frequency details. So that's usually my approach. If you have to use bump, you can, but it's a fake, right? You got to be aware that it's a 2D effect. It's not actually deforming the surface, but sometimes you can't even tell. If you're a good artist and you know how to use bump maps with the displacement, then you're going to give a crisp detail. But you know, if you want something that really holds up the screen from every lighting condition, you want something that's also affecting the glossiness of the face, like how reflective it is, then that's really what you're going to need that blue channel for, that really fine, almost like a noisy macro detail, because that's going to make the reflections feel very diffuse. But if you paint it out, like if you erase part of it, say for the tip of the nose, for the forehead, then that's going to make it more shiny. So instead of relying on roughness and gloss maps for the face, you're using the XYZ detail to basically modulate the reflections on the face. And that's really what realistic reflection on the face is. Obviously, there's some superficial layers like sweat or, you know, grease, depending what, like on the T-zone. But, you know, the look of the glossiness of a face is really determined by the roughness of the skin, which is coming from the displacement. So if you're thinking like that, when you're approaching your textures, like thinking about realism, how light really interacts with the surface, I find you're always going to get a more realistic result that's going to hold up in more than just one lighting environment.
Hey, Chris, this is amazing information, and you've been so good about just giving us a little bit more of a view of Thanos. I wanted to use this because I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh my God, we're really, I mean, it's been so absorbing about just learning more about Thanos. We wanted to give you the chance to talk a little bit and maybe segue into the course that you're going to be teaching with the CGMA. And maybe you can just give us the sense of what students could possibly get out of it. And also what kind of, where do you need to be skill set level to be able to participate in your course? So if you can kind of walk us through a little bit of the highlights of your course, you know, maybe the assets you're going to use, and just give us a little overview.
Yeah, so I like the course that I've created, like I've said before, I'm an artist first and a technician second. I like to try to keep things as creative as possible. And I like to show my workflow from start to finish. So I'm just going to briefly kind of go over that. I'm just going to hop over to PureRef over here, if it's still open. So what I like to do is I always like to start with thinking about a creature. So for example, we start with a base mesh that I provide. So this is a detailed mesh here, but I provide a much more simpler version of this that allows a little bit of interpretation. And this is quite realistic to what goes on in a real studio, because a lot of the time as a texture painter, a model will be finished and you're going to get it and it's going to be somewhat sculpted. You know, there's going to be broad shapes in there, suggestions in the wrinkles, but there's not going to be that fine level of detail. That's usually left up to the texture painter to decide how that is going to look. And that's sort of what I want to simulate. Now, what I always love to do is I start by thinking about the character. What is the model suggesting? You might already have some concept art from another department. Like in the case of Thanos, we had that great sort of 2D, 3D hybrid concept from Marvel. But I always want to be telling a story. That's at the core. That's really what you want to do, is really get those creative juices flowing and start to think about what you're going to do to tell a story about this creature. And I find with this course that all the students have a relatively different approach. Some are going to go more aquatic. Some are going to make it look like more like a monkey, looking at walruses. And so what I love to do is start by creating a giant selection of all this different reference material so that I can see if anything really stands out, and I can start to figure out what sort of direction I want to take it in. So for my creature, when I started it, I was looking at a lot of like monkeys, smaller kind of creatures, something that's about, 5, maybe 3 feet, 2.5 feet high. And I also wanted to put the creature in an environment that would lend itself well to creating very detailed and interesting textures. So what I was looking at was, the Galapagos Islands, because they have this awesome sort of lava flow rock formations. And that is describing what sort of environment this creature could be living in. So what is it eating? Like, what's the conditions of the weather? How much sun is going to be beating down on that creature's face and creating like lots of dry skin, leatheriness. And then that translates into the color, into the bump surfaces, into the reflection, all the little details that I want to add. And so once I have that, I start to create a concept. And this is a process where I'm starting to paint with a poly paint very quickly, laying out color, just trying to get an idea of the palette. It's something that's a very quick process. You don't want to spend too much because it's not going to be used in the texture, but it's for you to figure out what direction to take this in. So this is my finished concept for the creature before I even started texturing it. And like I said, everybody that takes the course probably will come up with something totally different, because it can go in all directions. Some people want it to look like he's an alien, like he exists in a cave, so it's going to look more bat. Or some of them, put a bit more high concept into it, where it's like, oh, he used to be like a samurai warrior, and now he's a hermit in the woods. And so, it's all a variety of stuff that just starts to generate ideas about what you can do to interpret that into a skin surface. So you can see, like, I've been inspired by iguanas, so I'm putting a lot of that sort of detail onto the scales. The skin is feeling very rough, very weathered. There's salt, there's dry skin. He looks kind of like he's hungry because he's a bit of a scavenger. Maybe he's eating crabs or something like that. And then his clothing is reflecting that too. It's made from skins from maybe creatures that he's caught and eaten, and then he's dried out the skins. So I've already got a really good foundation. I've thought about a lot of stuff. I've tried a variety of different things, different colors, different sort of textures very quickly to get an idea about what direction to go in. And so then I can take this reference, take this concept, and then go over to ZBrush to start applying the skin surface detail. Now, this is usually a bit of a hybrid process. Now, the thing is with Thanos, I use the texturing XYZ method to get those skin scans onto the surface, but I used maybe 8 or 9 different scans to really create a surface that I was happy with. And that's just not really, that's not really an option for a lot of people. So what's really great is that Texturing XYZ, they have released a package. I can just, again, that's not it. I do have a link. Trying to find it here. Where is that?
By the way, is that model going to be part of the class?
It is. Yes. So I provide this this mesh as a starting point, and it's more simpler than this though. Like, it doesn't have all the detail that I've created. That's up to you to create. But it's a more simplified version of this model without all the finer detail put in there. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to show the pack, but I have a link on the website, and what that is a lot of those skin surface details from the Texturing XYZ scans, but they've been put into an alpha form so that I can start to drag those details onto the surface. So I'm still getting really beautiful looking detailed results that look quite similar to what I was achieving inside of Mari. Now, because this is a personal project, it's up to you to create it. I'm not going to be saying that's wrong or that's right. That means that you can spend the time really crafting the skin. I couldn't do that with Thanos. I had to be working very fast, very efficiently, which is why I had to stick with those scans, because I had to erase part of it and then paint new details in according to whatever notes I was getting from supervisors. But I love this process in ZBrush of really exploring the different alphas, what kind of effects they give, and then I'm getting really nice looking results. Now, I use HD geometry inside of ZBrush, and what that allows me to do is subdivide to a very high amount in an isolated area, and I can apply those different alphas. You can't see that in the on screen here because I don't have HD turned on, but if I did, you would see even more detail than what's being represented in this ZBrush tool. It's just a process where it isolates an area and then it up-reses it. But when you bake out your displacement, all that detail is being put into the displacement map. And so I get very beautiful, high-res, high-crisp results that I can put into different layers in ZBrush and start to, really form the core of the skin, really focusing on how it reads from a distance and then up close as well. So from there, once we have the sculpt done, then it's time to create the textures inside of Mari. So I'm just going to go over to Mari for a second here. And I show you my process of starting with a color map for the skin, which I'll just try to go over here. Hopefully this is it. No. Yeah, so I show you my process for how I build up the dimension of the skin, how I get that tonality out of the details, and then layer a lot of different elements on top of that, like dry skin, little skin flakes, that kind of thing. That's all going to go back into the shading for the skin surface, as well as also all the detail that I put into the scales. Again, referring back to my concept art so that I'm following my guide. I usually don't stick to it 100%, but at least it gives me a foundation so that I can start to branch out and explore different things if they suggest themselves. But I love having that exploration that I did at the beginning with the concept art so that I know which sort of direction to go in for the coloration, where I want to put the details, and then how it should look from a distance and close up. So I go over my process for creating textures for the teeth, for the skin, for the eyes as well, which I don't have in this scene, and all these little details on the head as well, like the horns up here, how I use Substance Designer to bake out different control maps so that I'm able to paint highlights or shadows or cavity detail. I really try to use all the tools I can to get the results that I get. But this is quite this is such a fun process for me creating skin. I really love this process. I've done it quite a bit, and I feel like I've got a pretty good workflow that easily translates. Now, when it comes to what your skill level should be, ideally, you would love to have, I would love you to have at least a basic grasp of Mari, how the layering system works. I do go over it in the course, but it would be good if you at least knew a little bit about that sort of workflow, creating layers in here, and creating different channels. If you have some sort of fundamental knowledge of how that works, this process is going to be a lot more clearer because it is a little bit of a learning curve. But it's a pretty comfortable one if you have any experience in Photoshop, because the layer system is so similar. And I try to be as descriptive as I can when I'm talking about the different methods. I try to keep my shading setups as simple as possible as well, but allow you to kind of bring your creation to life, give you enough information so that you can really take it to that next level and bring out the realism, really describing what's important, what's not. And I really look forward to sharing that sort of information with you. So after the Mari is finished, then what I usually do is I start to show my shading setups. by taking the model into Maya, and I'm using V-Ray here, but it's pretty easy to translate that information over to whatever renderer you're using, Redshift, Arnold, RenderMan. It's all kind of similar sort of concepts. You're talking about glossiness, roughness, subsurface scattering, sampling information. Again, I try to be as descriptive as possible, but it would be good if you have at least a fundamental understanding about how this sort of stuff works. So yeah, this is one of the renders I've done of the creature. Again, this, like I said, art is abandoned, it's never finished. I'm probably going to go back to this and add more detail. I want to get a bit more sort of dry skin on him and scabbiness, that kind of stuff. Do some more work on the eyes. Like I'm trying some different things with the shape of the head as well, like trying to get a little bit more sort of expression in the look. And I'm also exploring how the light is reacting to the surface of the skin. Let's go over here. So yeah, you can kind of get a sense of where I've taken it from, all the way from a concept to the final sort of render. And then finally, I wrap everything up by just showing you a bit of my compositing workflow as well. Now, I've always been a bit scared of compositing. I've never really been a nuke person until recently. And I'm really loving what you can do just to take it to the next level, adding a bit of depth of field, compositing it with a background plate. And then one of the things that I show you is how to isolate certain parts of the face that I want to enhance a little bit, like the dry skin in between the scales here. Just as an example, I have a mask that I created inside of Mari that looks like this. And this is an isolated red and green channel. The red is describing the dry skin, and the green is describing all the dry skin between the layers, between the folds of the skin and the scales. So what I can do in here, if we just go over here. So this is what it looks like as a raw render. And then when I shuffle the channels in, I'm able to just enhance that dry skin in between the scales. So you can sort of see before and after. This is the kind of stuff that really just gives you an extra little bit of edge. And then, there's stuff like film grain and lens distortion, all that kind of stuff as well. A bit of film grading going on until you get to a point where you've got a nice presentation image. So that's what I'm covering over 6 weeks. And try to condense as much of the information as I can over the course. And it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy seeing what people come up with, because it really is pushing your imagination to kind of build a story for this character. And it really represents, what it's like to work in a real pipeline as well, especially one where you're able to do a bit of everything. You're able to come up with a concept, detail it, look dev it, texture it. So yeah, that's basically it.
Hey, Chris, I just wanted to say, just me and Manny just were literally, our jaws were dropping the entire time. I could speak for myself and for Manny. We were just like scratching our heads like, that's not higher resolution enough. So we just want to say how grateful we are to kind of get this sort of behind the scenes view about probably one of the biggest characters of the freaking decade, Thanos. And really bringing your level of expertise, of being generous with your time to give us a peek into this workflow. Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time on behalf of the CGMA, Manny, myself, and all the attendees that came to kind of be a part of this experience. And we look forward to helping promote and support this class. And for all you students out there who are really jazzed about doing this, I would definitely sign up as soon as you can, because I believe he's going to definitely fill up pretty soon. This would be learning from one of the greats. So with that said, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome, guys. It's my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I love to share this stuff. And you know, I love the community as a whole too. Like people that want to create creatures, they're my kind of people.